south for a time, but further spells of rain or showers will affect Wales and the southwest. Meanwhile, the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast sees sunshine returning and an awful lot of warmth. 22 or 23 Celsius here, high teens elsewhere, although feeling a bit fresher there for Scotland as well as northern England, especially under the outbreaks of rain, which will push north during Saturday evening, clearing away once again during the early hours of Sunday. And then further showers arrive later in the night across western parts of the UK, along with a keen breeze. Another mild night to come, temperatures fairly widely staying in the teens. Then we begin Sunday with some brightness, some sunshine across central and eastern parts of the UK, cloudier skies further west, showers arriving from the west as the day progresses, along with that keen breeze. And then Monday sees the cloud thickening after a bright start, further wind and rain turning up later.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's Associate Editor at the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and also former Conservative London mayoral candidate, Sean Bailey. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2 minutes past 4. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Some breaking news to bring you in the last few minutes. Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll provide an update on calling an election for the Assembly next week, adding talks with Stormont parties will continue. There's been no fully functioning devolved government since February. The DUP is blocking the restoration of power sharing in its protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol. Well, party leader of the DUP, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, says the protocol is harming the economy.
We have the ridiculous situation where the cost of building hospitals and schools and houses and roads in Northern Ireland is being driven through the roof by these tariffs imposed by the European Union, even though those steel products are coming from another part of the United Kingdom. So the protocol is harming our economy, harming households. It's driving up the cost of living. Food is more expensive in Northern Ireland because the cost of transporting food from Great Britain has gone up due to the protocol. That's why we want the protocol sorted out.
The Prime Minister has defended his decision not to attend the COP27 climate summit in Egypt next month. Rishi Sunak is facing widespread criticism from the opposition over his choice not to go, as well as from some members of his own party. But speaking in South London this morning, he said he'll instead be focusing on what he called domestic challenges. He's also backing down on a pledge to fine patients £10 if they miss GP and hospital appointments.
We're an example for others to follow at the pace in which we've reduced climate emissions, how we're going about protecting our environment, and those things are really important to me. It's important to me that as Prime Minister we leave behind an environment that is better for our children and grandchildren. I'm very passionate about that. I'm very personally committed to it, and I just think at the moment it's right that I'm also focusing on the depressing domestic challenges we have with the economy, and I think that's what people watching would reasonably expect me to be doing as well.
Meanwhile, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says not showing up to the climate conference shows a failure in leadership.
Prime Minister should be going to COP. He needs to show leadership. This is a hugely important issue, climate change. It's wound together with the energy crisis, and I think many people would be expecting the Prime Minister of the UK not just to attend COP, but to use it as an opportunity to pull world leaders together to deal with climate and to deal with energy. And if that doesn't happen, it's a failure of leadership.
A man has been convicted in Bristol of murdering his former partner, who died in 21 years after he doused her with petrol and set her on fire. Stephen Craig targeted Jacqueline Kirk in a car park in Weston-super-Mare in 1998. She suffered burns to 35% of her body. Craig was convicted of grievous bodily harm with intent, but was arrested again last year following Ms. Kirk's death. During the trial, medical experts explained how Craig's actions 21 years ago had made a more than minimal contribution to her death due to the long-lasting impact of the burns. A woman has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 34 years for killing her friend and decapitating the body. 38-year-old Gemma Mitchell has become the first woman to be sentenced on television in England. The woman was found guilty of murdering Mi Quen Chong at her London home in June last year and then driving her body in a suitcase to Devon. The judge's sentencing was broadcast live from the Old Bailey in London.
There is the chilling aspect of what you did to and with her body after you had killed her. You have shown absolutely no remorse, and it appears that you are in complete denial as to what you did, notwithstanding what, in my judgment, amounted to overwhelming evidence against you.
A further 13 inquests have opened into the deaths of former patients of the disgraced breast surgeon Ian Patterson. The Birmingham consultant is currently serving a 20-year sentence after carrying out needless operations on more than 1,000 patients over 14 years. An inquiry found he exaggerated or invented cancer risks. Police later asked a coroner to examine whether any former patients died from unnatural causes due to potentially substandard treatment. The husband of the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has been violently assaulted after a break-in at the couple's California home earlier today. A statement from her office says the assailant is in custody and the motivation for the attack is under investigation. Paul Pelosi was taken to hospital and is expected to make a full recovery. His wife, Nancy, was not in San Francisco at the time. A British-owned gas firm says it has reopened for this coming winter, increasing the country's gas storage capacity by 50%. Centrica says it's brought the Rough gas storage facility, which closed in 2017. Secretary of State for Business Grant Shapps tweeted saying the reopening is brilliant news, adding the move will strengthen UK energy security. And the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has lent a helping hand in putting the hands of Big Ben back to GMT. Sir Lindsay says the clock's change will herald a new beginning for the iconic London landmark. It will be the first time Big Ben's put back since the scaffolding came down from the Elizabeth Tower following a 5-year restoration project. Clocks go back by an hour this Sunday. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana.
Good afternoon. It's fast approaching 9 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, it was suggested that Prince William, the Prince of Wales, would not be going to Qatar to watch England play in the World Cup next month. That was according to the Telegraph. Apparently, he has a series of engagements during it, one of them being in America, where he'll be awarding the Earthshot Prize. But the latest update is that he may in fact go if England reach the final. But seriously, how did Qatar even win the bid to host the World Cup in the first place? It's ridiculous. With a disgraceful human rights record and its criminalisation of same-sex relationships, who in their right mind thought that this was a place that a World Cup should be held? And if we are going to be judgmental about things and we're doing things like taking the knee, surely the woke mafia should have come out in their droves to explain why this should not take place in this country. But where are they? They're actually going, a.k.a. Gary Lineker and others like him. Gary will apparently use the platform to highlight the human rights abuses whilst taking his wage paid for by you and I to commentate on the BBC while still maintaining the moral high ground. And this week, James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, warned that the LGBT supporters need to compromise and be respectful of the host nation during the tournament. Now, I'm all for when in Rome, do as the Romans, so follow the rules. But in this case, the rules are fundamentally flawed, so no one should be going to Qatar for the World Cup in the first place. The laws there are simply not conducive to a world event. Number 10 spokesperson said Qatar's policies are not those of the UK government and not ones that we would endorse. Well, Harry Kane and others plan to wear a rainbow One Love armband during the tournament to make an anti-discrimination statement, and apparently they will accept potential fines for doing this. Here's the thing. Instead of wearing a flaming armband, how about you forego your fee and don't go? Can you see why I can't be bothered to go along with taking the knee? Baloney. I mean, it's ridiculous. You all talk a good game, but if you all refuse to go, as did the other nations of the world, instead of these empty, pathetic gestures, things would change a lot faster. Oh, goodness me. So before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. The Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, who do you trust with the economy? Questions have been raised as to how the Tories are going to fix the economy since Rishi Sunak took the helm. And recent surveys have indicated that Sunak is gaining favour among the general public. But the GB News People's poll revealed that Britons believe that Labour's Sir Keir Starmer is best placed to deal with the economic crisis the country faces. So I'm asking, who do you trust with the economy? At 4:50, we're heading to Ukraine. Russian officials say that they are moving civilians out of the Kherson region in southern Ukraine as they prepare for battle against Zelensky's forces. I'll be speaking to someone who says living in the occupied region was like being held hostage. And still to come at 5, we'll put the spotlight on a particular guest or subject matter in Friday Focus. And this week, I'm going to be asking whether Brexit has destroyed the Conservative Party. Since the referendum in 2016, the country has seen 2 general elections and 5 Tory leaders, from David Cameron to the current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Sorry, I don't mean to laugh. Commentators have dubbed the circumstances as unprecedented. I dubbed them as almost verging on the ridiculous. But can people attribute the recent political turbulence within the Tory party to Brexit? Or do you think it's something else? Well, all of that is on the way in the next hour. As ever, tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Right, come on, let's do this. Let's get started. Let's welcome again to my panel, Associate Editor at the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and also former Conservative London mayoral candidate, Sean Bailey. Well, firstly, Sean, thank you very much for joining me. It's the first time you've been here. And always good to see you, Kevin.
Great to be here.
Thank you very much for coming in. So I'm going to start with you, Sean, because what are your views on the concept that, first of all, the World Cup is in Qatar, and then secondly, the idea that a lot of people are doing a lot of talking and saying how they're going to make all these gestures, but they're still going?
Look, firstly, it has to be said, Gary Lineker is the most ridiculous man in the country. He's traversed across the media in the last year has shown that we should not take him seriously. And if you really want to show your support for the World Cup, start with not following Gary Lineker on Twitter or any other social media. That's the first thing. I think the second thing to say is it comes down to FIFA. FIFA has always been, at best, a dysfunctional organisation. I sat on a train and spoke about this with someone, and they suggested a slightly criminal organisation. The point is, FIFA should have seen this coming. People around FIFA should have said, look, we need to go somewhere else. But, of course, money talks. And Qatar put the money up in the way they did, and FIFA grabbed it with both hands, and this will roll on and on and on. And it's unfortunate because FIFA, and it's only FIFA who need to be responsible for this, could have done something else.
Well, obviously, Gary Lineker's not here to defend himself, so we don't want to be too, horrible to him. But at the end of the day, he is still going and he's taking the money and apparently doing some sort of gesture to show he's, whatever.
Yeah, but you get the same with the Olympics. You might think it shouldn't have been in Beijing, but you could say athletes shouldn't go, commentators shouldn't go. No, I'm a big fan of Gary Lineker. I can see why he's going, because it's his job. That's why he's going. I don't think it's really the money, it's his job. But I've been to Qatar twice to report on migrant workers and go around the camps they were in. And the squalid conditions they were enduring, their passports taken away, treated like slaves under the kafala system, working incredibly long days in dangerous conditions, unreal heat, and thousands dying on building the infrastructure. That World Cup should never have gone to that country. There's bribery and skullduggery involved. But it's there. Will I criticise football fans from England and Wales or Scotland, Northern Ireland, come to that for watching it or wanting to go? No, I won't. I understand why they will think it's wrong. It is here, but nevertheless, it is a tournament, and I want England, I want Wales to win. I think the big flashpoint will be on the streets if the Qataris, there's about 100,000 Qataris, there's about 1 million migrant workers, and they kind of are very authoritarian because they fear they'll lose control of their country. They're also socially conservative, although often very hypocritical about it. But if you're a gay football fan and you want to go and be holding somebody's hand, or you just kiss somebody on the cheek in the stadium or on the street, and you're arrested and you're locked up in prison and you can potentially be jailed for years, I think that's just totally unacceptable. It's where I think James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, got it wrong. And he got stood on by Downing Street.
I think in a sense he got it right, because I know James as a person, and he was trying to say as a man, look, you will be in a very potentially dangerous situation, and I'm just trying to help you think that through, because if you did something here really out of order, our police would arrest you and give you a cup of tea. It will be very different.
I'm not quite sure it's like that here.
It'd be very different there, and James is probably just trying to say to people, please don't put yourself at risk. There's other ways that we can deal with this, and ultimately James will be the person who'll have to row in and help people out.
Well, I hope he does row in and help people out, although I hope nobody is in trouble to need help. If they do, they should. But no, I think it's just, look, it's a basic human right, isn't it? You can love whoever you like. You're not harming anybody else. What is wrong? What is wrong? And I think it's the Qataris who have to change, not people who are going to watch football.
But that's the point, though. Why would they change if everything stays the same?
Yeah.
So if they carry on behaving in that way and people still go to the World Cup and still, accept the FIFA still allow it to be held in Qatar, how do we expect that? Because ultimately, it is a humanitarian thing, isn't it? It's not. It's not a rule where you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. This is actually. This is a human right to be able to.
That's why I say
it's a basic fundamental human right.
Basic fundamental human right. Places like that, we shouldn't be.
But that's why I say FIFA needed to do something about this. The Olympics, the World Cup, the Commonwealth Games, they are effectively the jewels of mankind. They're the things that we share together, we put around, and it is a special thing to host them. So therefore, they should be treating this with a lot more reverence. And putting it in Qatar doesn't suggest they are.
When a tournament like the World Cup was awarded, it shouldn't just be the money and whether you have the stadiums. It's will you treat people who go to watch with respect? That should just be absolutely fundamental.
That should be first. It should be looked at, does this nation hold the basic values that we can all get behind? Then they should consider
And wearing a rainbow armband or taking
means nothing. The reason Gary Lineker gets pointed at is because he spends his whole time, pointing at other people, virtue signalling. Now it's his turn. He's failed horribly.
He has failed.
I don't accept his failed,
I think he has.
I know.
He's going to the World Cup. He's actually going there.
He is.
can't go on and on and on about it and say how lambast people for saying things and then you go and do something that's just as bad.
You've got to go and make your point. He's got to go and make his point.
He'd make a better point if he didn't go. If he said, I'm not going because of it, that would then I'd be behind him 100%.
Again, I disagree. I think it's better if when he's out there and he's commentating and he makes his point from the country.
I think he also make the same point in this country and not go, and that's a bigger point.
He also will have to listen to James Cleverly, because if he's commentating and says something particularly provocative, they might come and get him.
Now that would be...
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible.
We'll talk more because we want to find out what you guys at home think of that. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. No, that wasn't it. I'm asking, who do you trust with the economy? Is it Rishi Sunak? He entered number 10, and questions have been raised as to how the Tories are going to fix the economy. A GB News People's poll revealed that Britons still believe that Labour's Sir Keir Starmer is best placed to deal with the economic crisis that the country faces. So I'm asking, who do you trust? Send me your thoughts. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Tell me what you think. I've got a poll up right now asking that very question. Who do you trust with the economy? Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer? Cast your vote now. But first, we'll be back in a break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Good afternoon. It's fast approaching 22 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. Now it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, who do you trust with the economy? Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer? Now, as Rishi Sunak, he became Prime Minister this week and he confirmed Jeremy Hunt will stay on as Chancellor. Now, questions have already been raised as to how the Tories are going to fix the economy, and initial polls have indicated that Sunak is gaining favour among the general public, and is expected that he will shorten the gap between the Tories and Labour. Labour still well ahead. However, a GB News People's poll asked who would be best to manage the economy. 90% said the Conservatives with Sunak as Prime Minister, but 32% said Labour with Starmer as Prime Minister. Now, this comes as pressure is increasing for the Tories to tackle the cost of living crisis after a disastrous mini-budget by the former Prime Minister Liz Truss. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, who do you trust with the economy? Is it Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer? Well, I'm joined now by political commentator Suzanne Evans. Suzanne, welcome to the programme. Thank you very much for joining me. Suzanne, OK, so in your view, I'll come straight to the point. Who do you think will manage the economy best?
Well, I personally think I'd be looking to Rishi Sunak in the Conservative Party. But to be honest, I don't think either party in this sort of century really have had much of a record on the economy. Under both Labour and Conservative governments, we've got a tax burden at a 70-year all-time high. Quantitative easing has been rife and become a tool of monetary policy now, I think, since about 2009. And arguably that's led to part of the inflationary crisis that we're in now and the cost of living crisis, among other issues. So it's a difficult choice. But I think if I'm pushed, I'd have to come down on the side of the Conservatives, because you look at Labour's record, and I frankly think it is far, far worse. So I think who can forget in 2010 when the Conservatives went into coalition with the Lib Dems and went into government, and the incoming Chief Secretary to the Treasury found a note from the outgoing Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Liam Byrne, saying, there's no money left, good luck. They had literally broken the bank, spent everything. And of course, the Conservative Party then had the devil's own job to try and undo some of that mess. I think Labour is very profligate. I'm not saying that the Conservatives don't like to spend as well. They clearly do. But I think if you look at Labour, they're probably worse and probably more likely to spend taxpayers' money in pursuit of more political ends. So, for instance, in Tony Blair's administration, we had copious use of private finance initiatives to fund hospitals, which looked great because it looked as though under Labour that they were building hospitals, they were investing in the NHS, which of course is everybody's favourite hobby horse. But those PFI contracts, they started out being £14 billion in loans. By the time they finished paying them, they were up to £76 billion. I mean, that's credit card rates of interest. The negotiations were non-existent. Basically, the people offering the debt just rolled roughshod over everybody and demanded what they like, and Labour were only too happy to sign those contracts, to the point where hospitals are now having to pay a significant percentage of their income before they even treat any patients in repaying the interest. I could go on, the £13 billion wasted on the NHS IT scheme, the introduction of things like tax credits, which were done with the best of intentions, but actually had the effect of keeping wages low. And that's something that thankfully now, post-Brexit, we are seeing the reversal of, and wages are rising. And of course, unemployment is falling. So personally, I think there are lots of reasons historically why we can't trust Labour. That's before you even get started on things like the fact they want to privatise the railways and utilities. They welcome uncontrolled immigration. How are they going to fund that? Very keen on keeping benefits high, arguably to increase dependence on the Labour Party and to shore up their vote, one might argue. So I think, yeah, the Conservatives haven't had the best record on the economy of late, I don't think. But personally, I'd be plumping for them.
Interesting. Suzanne, thank you very much for that. Stay right there. That's Suzanne. She's a political commentator. I'm also joined now by former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. Scarlett, follow that, crikey. What does Labour? She's just talked about a good game.
Where do you start? I mean, Suzanne says I wouldn't trust Labour after the last Tory administration only a few days ago completely crashed the economy. Right. So let's look at what Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are doing. I mean, one of the things that was absolutely essential to keep the economy going, to keep people from not being able to heat their homes, was a cap on the oil, electricity and gas prices. Which was opposed by Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss and is now in. I mean, the problem with Labour is because they're in opposition, they can only put up ideas, right? The other idea which they put up, which again took a very long time to get in, was the windfall tax, which Rishi Sunak has put in, tweaked. So actually Shell, who makes billions and billions of extra profits because of what's going on, doesn't pay any of the windfall tax at all, even though the CEO actually believes that they should be doing it. So those are two of the things that are happening now. Now, what we've got to do is we've got to look at the choices that people have got to make, because actually, what sort of country do we want? And again, you look at what the Labour Party want, and what they're saying is, we think that people who are foreigners and work in Britain should pay in Britain. So we're going to get rid of the non-dom, so that they don't just only pay £30,000 in tax. They pay their tax properly, which will get an awful lot, and that money will go into breakfast clubs, right? So that all children in all schools can have breakfast, because what we know at the moment is we've got a cost of living crisis. We want to get children into schools, which is very good for them, and we want to get them eating. I mean, the other thing is to take, one of the other ideas is to take, to stop having private schools allowed not to pay VAT on school fees, and that money would go straight into making state schools better. So actually, not only as whenever the Labour Party puts anything up is it costed, funded, but actually it's about choices it's about whose side you want.
Because what you just said there, you said the Labour Party always cost them and they fund it and everything. Let's bring Suzanne in on this as well. Let's bring Suzanne. And Suzanne, I want you to respond to that, because she's basically said the Labour Party, Scarlett said the Labour Party always cost everything.
Well, this is what I was saying earlier about it being politically driven. I think this, from what we've just heard, that's not so much economic policy as a class war, to be honest. Let's attack people that send their children to public schools. Let's attack businesses that actually are profitable and make money. Let's attack people who pay tax overseas but actually spend an awful lot of money and pay VAT on the goods that they buy in Britain. So I think this actually kind of shows I was right about what I was saying earlier. Let's just break those things down. So the windfall tax, I was quite disappointed to see the Conservatives bring that in, actually. Shell has been mentioned, obviously a big oil giant that is making excessive profits, arguably, at this current time. But for many years, they didn't make any profit. And they're not paying any windfall taxes now because of the conditions put on by the Conservative government that they had to invest in new infrastructure. And that's why Shell is avoiding taxes. They're not avoiding taxes because they're somehow evil. They're avoiding taxes because they're actually investing in energy, which has got to be the thing to do at this particular time. And let's not also forget that Shell is now a wholly British company, as opposed to an Anglo-Dutch company that it was last year. And the reason it's now British and put its headquarters solely in Britain is because the Dutch government was basically behaving in a way that was not encouraging it to invest. There were big court cases against Shell that it felt were disadvantageous to it.
I mean, it could be.
Move to Britain. And if the Labour Party gets in, this is what we're going to see happen.
Well, potentially, but it could be that Shell got very favourable deals, because I hear they haven't really paid that much tax. Scarlett, your view on what's been said there.
I didn't actually say Shell was evil. What I said was the windfall tax was tweaked so that Shell didn't have to pay it. And that's the problem, is it's not, I mean, when you have the CEO of Shell yesterday saying that they should be paying tax, they should be protecting the vulnerable, right? And they're not paying tax, then something is wrong. And that's what we've got to do.
They're just not paying the windfall tax. Let's be clear.
They're not paying the windfall tax. The windfall tax was actually, it's about excessive profits. They know they're making excessive profits, right? They're making excessive profits not because they're running Shell well, but because there's what's happening in the rest of the world. They understand it. The CEO expects to pay it, but actually the windfall tax has been tweaked so that they aren't paying. It's not about Shell, actually. It's about whether we're serious about trying to make up for taxes in this way. I mean, what we've got to do is, there is a black hole, right? And we have to do something about tax, or we have to do something about public services.
Scarlett, we know there's a black hole. It's a huge black hole, which created by both. The question is, who do you trust the most? Scarlett Maguire, thank you very much. And also Suzanne Evans. Really good to talk to you both. Great to hear your thoughts. Right, so let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Who do you trust more on the economy, Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer? Jerry says, that's like playing heads or tails, and I'm not playing, thanks. Munro says, what is Starmer's plan? Moan, 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 moan. No policies, no hope. Terry thought a similar view to Jerry. He says, Choosing between Starmer and Sunak is like asking if you prefer a lethal injection or the electric chair. None of the above, thank you. Interesting. Well, keep your thoughts coming. We'd love to hear your views. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Don't forget, you can also stream us live on YouTube. Now, after the break, we'll continue with our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, who do you trust with the economy? Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, Associate Editor at the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and also former Conservative mayoral candidate Sean Bailey. Then at 5, in Friday Focus, this week I'll be asking, has Brexit destroyed the Conservative Party? Since the referendum in 2016, the country has seen 2 general elections and, of course, 5 Tory leaders, David Cameron and loads of others, to the current one now, Rishi Sunak. And commentators, have attributed the recent turbulence within their party to that fateful vote. But is that the real reason? All of that after your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It is 4:34. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The Northern Ireland Secretary says he will call a snap election in the country, but hasn't said when. Chris Heaton-Harris said he would give more information next week and would meet the Stormont parties. There's been no fully functioning devolved government since February. The DUP is blocking the restoration of power sharing in its protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Prime Minister has defended his decision not to attend the COP27 climate summit in Egypt next month. Rishi Sunak is facing widespread criticism from the opposition over his choice not to go, as well as some members from his own party. But speaking in South London this morning, he said he will be instead focusing on domestic issues.
Well, we are trying. We're an example for others to follow at the pace in which we've reduced climate emissions, how we're going about protecting our environment, and those things are really important to me. It's important to me that as Prime Minister we leave behind an environment that is better for our children and grandchildren. I'm very passionate about that. I'm very personally committed to it, and I just think at the moment it's right that I'm also focusing on the depressing domestic challenges we have with the economy, and I think that's what people watching would reasonably expect me to be doing as well.
The husband of the US House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, has been violently assaulted after a break-in at the couple's California home earlier on today. A statement from her office says the assailant is in custody and the motivation for the attack is under investigation. Paul Pelosi was taken to hospital and he's expected to make a full recovery. His wife was not in San Francisco at the time. And the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has lent a helping hand in putting the hands of Big Ben back to GMT. Sir Lindsay says the clock's change will herald a new beginning for the iconic London landmark. It will be the first time Big Ben's put back since the scaffolding came down from the Elizabeth Tower following a 5-year restoration project. Clocks go back by an hour this Sunday. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate, and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for big guests, big opinions, and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Welcome back. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now it's time for the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, who do you trust with the economy? Is it Rishi Sunak or is it Sir Keir Starmer? Now, initial polls have indicated that Sunak is gaining favour amongst the general public, and it is expected that he will shorten the gap between the Tories and the Labour Party. However, the GB News People poll asked who would be best to manage the economy, and surprisingly, only 19% said the Conservatives, with Sunak as Prime Minister, but 32% said Labour, with Sir Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. Are things swinging? Pressure is actually increasing for the Tories to tackle the ongoing cost of living crisis, with Sir Keir Starmer calling for a general election, but of course he would. But can Labour be trusted after bankrupting the country the last time they were in office? So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, who do you trust with the economy? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by Associate Editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and also former Conservative London mayoral candidate Sean Bailey. So Kevin, I can't believe that a GB News poll actually suggested that our viewers would prefer Sir Keir Starmer.
Oh, I can. And Labour didn't bankrupt the economy. There was a global financial collapse.
Oh, that's what they said.
And debt in 2010 was less than half of what it is now. And look, the Conservatives have suffered their Black Wednesday moment. Go back to 1992 and the exchange rate mechanism kicked out, crashed the economy with Liz Truss, who just wasn't up to it, went on a laboratory experiment, and Rishi Sunak will try and blame her for everything. But the problem is people also remember him when he was Chancellor, and the furlough scheme during the COVID pandemic was excellent. It was very, very good. Some faults with it, but it was essentially very good. But after that, they'll remember he put up national insurance. He took the tax burden to the highest since the 1940s. So he's got a record people remember, and they're just fed up. They're looking at inflation soaring. Now, when interest rates are going up, the value of wages is really low. Cuts to public services are coming along the line. Economic growth is sluggish, could be into a recession very shortly. During COVID, we took the biggest hit, then we took the longest to come out. The 12 years have not been a glorious economic record. They stand unfavourably when compared to the Labour period, including that crash. So people are thinking, why should I back the Conservatives? They've let me down. They've not raised my living standards. In many ways, they're cutting it now. They're incompetent, they haven't got any credibility, so I'll try the other side. Now, Labour's got a lot of work to do to clinch the deal, unquestionably the case. But as the boss of Tesco a fortnight ago said, Labour's got a pretty interesting plan for growth. Conservatives haven't.
Well, I think it's probably because they're further away in people's memory. People have forgotten about the PFI contract and all the other stuff that went on. I think
PFI contracts were a Conservative idea when Norman Lamont was Chancellor, went through Kenneth Clarke when he was Chancellor, and Labour expanded it when Gordon Brown was Chancellor. He shouldn't have. He should have wrapped it up. They were continuing in the Conservative period with George Osborne as Chancellor. I don't know if they're still going on, but they were. A Conservative idea that was always wasteful. Labour shouldn't have used it. I agree with that. It was a mistake. That 13-year period of Labour was not perfect.
It comes down to a few things. If you look at the two guests you had on earlier talking about the economy, it's actually the political explanation around the economy. Because what's interesting is Sir Keir Starmer agreed with almost everything Rishi Sunak did beforehand. He agreed with everything Liz Truss proposed except the 45p cut. And that would have only brought it back to where it was under Labour. And if you deal with people who have a longer memory, they will tell you, let's be clear, Labour smashed the economy to pieces through profligate spending. It was political decisions they made. Now, the fallout in the rest of the world was the fallout in the rest of the world, but that was decisions they made. But here's the key thing. Keir Starmer is riding high now because he hasn't had to answer clear questions. An election will force him to answer those questions.
Well,
and
I'd like him to answer what
he has no answers, and that's where the challenge lays. How is he going to answer those questions? Let's be clear, Rishi Sunak has behaved in a way that most of the world has behaved, and you could argue there's been some big failings here. And also the government, whichever government it is, needs to wear the failings of the Bank of England. The level of quantitative easing we've had has been wrong, and we've been very slow to raise interest rates, and that's why we're in a pickle now. If Rishi has a plan, I think the public are sharp enough to judge that plan against Keir Starmer's. His lead comes now because of the general chaos in the party and what we've had happen. I mean, 5 prime ministers in... I mean, that has to have an effect.
I think there may not be another for a few months now.
But that's the thing. I think if Rishi can win the politics, he can catch Labour back up, because older voters, and that's basically anybody over the age of 30 at this point, will understand the way Labour want to behave will cost us. And they want to...
Kevin's laughing.
It's just not true. If you go... I mean, I would like Labour to be promising more spending rather than being tight. But they're not. But if it's just a verifiable fact, if you go, Labour came in 1997, if you go up to 2007, just before the financial collapse, under Labour, debt and borrowing were below the levels inherited as a percentage of the economy.
But that's before...
before global financial collapse.
That's not... But this is the brilliance. This is the brilliance of people on the left.
You can't blame Labour for banks collapsing in the US.
They pick their comparison points very, very well. You cannot compare anything that happened back then because of the pandemic and the level of world borrowing
was profligate.
The level of borrowing we've had has been largely driven by the pandemic. You've seen that worldwide. And let's be clear, Labour are talking about expanding our public services, how they're going to pay for them. And the level of spending they had at the time was crazy. And if they're going to continue that now, it will have to grow through our taxes.
Debt continued climbing from 2010. George Osborne and David Cameron used to always say, right, we're going to balance the books. They kept having to put it off and off and off because growth was always so sluggish. One of the reasons it was sluggish is they got in 2010 and there was an encouraging recovery, and they immediately put up tax, 12 billion on VAT, and they immediately slashed investment. When you've got to grow the economy, the only way we're going to get lower borrowing, lower debt, better public services, higher incomes, you've got to invest.
Well, to be fair, the taxes have gone up to their highest level under Conservative.
Because they're paying for failure.
But this conversation shows us what's interesting, what really did happen. Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer will have to make a decision. Do they have this argument about the past, or do they have an argument about the future? I'd argue an argument about the past will work for Keir Starmer, because he'll be able to say to people, 5 prime ministers, your cost of living's gone up, whereas Rishi Sunak will have to explain how he's going to take us forward at this position.
Both have to own the future.
Yes.
What you're going to do for people in the future, but that is partly based on what your opponents have been doing in the recent past.
But it would be good for Keir Starmer to actually give us some more to go on, because I don't think he's given us enough to go on. And the argument is that, the opposition will steal our policies, but, people can't just buy an empty suitcase or a suitcase without knowing the contents. People would be prepared potentially to go with the Labour Party if they were more open about what they plan to do. He's not saying anything.
He's got to clinch the deal, but you've got to give him some credit for what he said already. For instance, he came up with a freeze on energy prices, funded by, in part, by a windfall tax. And then the government took it, although, as we were hearing in the debate early, gave Shell, who made 8 billion profits in the last 3 months. It's blood profits, because it's nothing to do with their ingenuity or their investment.
Well, can I just say, the windfall tax, even George Osborne put out a windfall tax at some point.
He did.
So they can't just simply say, it's my idea now, because I've forgotten about what happened. So it is a circulating idea that somebody's resurfaced. And actually, it came from the...
Hold on. It's not fair to say that Shell have done nothing. They've invested lots of money in the country. They've moved their business here. That's why they got themselves into that position of not paying so much.
They were making profits, and then Putin invaded Ukraine, and all of a sudden they got
none of that's driven by Shell.
Extra free profits.
Let's see what our viewers think of that, because this show is nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voices on your opportunity to be on the show. Tell us what you think about what we're discussing. And joining me now is, in London, is Rosh Haji. Hello, Rosh. Welcome. First timer, GB Voice. So, Ross, what do you think then? I mean, who do you trust with the economy and the numbers? Is it Rishi or is it Sir Keir Starmer?
Well, I think if you're right, lost fiscal credibility, we'd struggle to get a bank loan. And the question comes down to if Rishi Sunak and his party over the last few years have totally lost just simple credibility, why give him another chance? And I think we've given him enough chance. We've been through enough prime ministers and chancellors, and the argument of it's the better the devil you know doesn't even stand anymore. So I'd probably give a chance to the Labour Party in the next election.
Can I ask, in the previous election, if you did vote, would you have, or did you vote Conservative or Labour, out of interest, if you're allowed to say?
I voted for David Cameron, funny enough, when he first came in, and then I think I soon regretted it, and I'm back to my heart's back towards voting for Labour in this coming election.
Well, we'll see. Thank you, Ross. Thank you so much. Lovely to talk to you. That's Ross Haji. He's a great British voice. He's a first-timer from London. Thank you very much. Well, see.
Thank you.
Well, today I've been asking, who do you trust with the economy, Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer? Lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Marshall starts us off by saying, on a comparative basis, Rishi Sunak is a long way ahead of Starmer. But that is like comparing the ability to do brain surgery of a competent first aider with a 3-year-old with a kitchen knife.
It always makes me smile, right? But in the end, you're going to have to make a decision when you come to an election. And I always think if you think one isn't absolutely fantastic, well, go for the least worst. And people will go different ways on that. But I always think vote. Don't allow
There's no doubt.
cynicism to stop you having your say. Shouting at the telly is great. I do it myself. But you've also got to go into the ballot box and just vote who you think will be best for you and your family, your community.
Well, that's the way it goes. Well, let's see. Stuart says, odd question, given that one has already been Chancellor and has been roundly criticised by his own party for screwing up. Phyllis says, I doubt Starmer would be good at running the economy. Look at all the Labour-run councils. They're all bankrupt. That's a good point. I think a very good point.
Actually, most of the bankrupt councils are Conservative,
It's simply not true. The only councils to go bankrupt in London is Croydon Council, and it's a Labour council.
Yeah, well, you've picked one. You've picked one. You know.
What about Michael says, I don't think any current politician can be trusted to know what day it is, let alone running the economy. Well, the poll up on Twitter has been on throughout the show. I've been asking, who do you trust with the economy? Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer? And currently, 70.5% of you say Rishi, 29.5% say Sir Keir Starmer. Wonder who the half people are. Right. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, after the break, it's Inside Ukraine. I'll be speaking to someone who fled the city of Kherson, one of the 4 areas that was annexed by Russia. She says that she felt like she was being held hostage following the occupation. That is on the way after this break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is. Come on, make the case.
Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
To operate, absolutely no chance that it makes any money.
Is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. And now it's time to take a look inside Ukraine as Russian officials say that they've completed an operation to move civilians out of Kherson in southern Ukraine ahead of an expected battle. Now, the city has come to symbolise the country's resistance and resolve since it was invaded by Russia back in February. It was the first city to fall to Russian forces in early March, but its inhabitants have become infamous for their refusal to submit to Russian rule. They staged protests and even assassinating Russian officials. And the entire Kherson region was one of 4 that the Kremlin claimed to have annexed last month following hastily organised referendums. But Ukraine has been slowly recapturing territory in the region. But what is it like to live under Russian occupation in Kherson? My first guest, Yulia, is here to tell me more. Let's find out. Let's move on. She's actually lived in Russian-occupied Kherson, but let's first head to Ukraine. So Yulia joins me now live from Kyiv. Yulia, thank you so much for joining us. Now, talk to me about just how difficult it was living under Russian occupation in Kherson for you.
Hi, thank you for the chance to talk about it, to spread the word. Of course, it was very hard, really. We felt like we were taken hostage, like we were in a trap, because the Russians didn't let us leave the city, and for the whole month, for the first month of the war, and they didn't leave anyone to come to the city. So the farmers couldn't bring us some food, vegetables, meat, and while the Russians were trying to loot our grocery stores, we started running out of food. So we had to just go out of our houses and spend 3 or 4 hours in the queues to buy something, some food. So I forgot the taste of the milk, dairy products, of poultry, of vegetables. Really, it was hard to buy something. It was hard to buy some medicine for my mother, for example, because our pharmacies, they also were empty. And I could just spend 4 hours downtown just looking for some medicine, some meds. But it was always very hard to be downtown, because there were a lot of armed soldiers, a lot of tanks on our main square, beautiful main square, and it was really awful, and there were a lot of explosions every time. Even though there were no fights in the city, we heard the explosions which were around the city. We heard the missiles that were flying to Mykolaiv, because Mykolaiv is a city near Kherson, and missiles were always flying above our houses, and they were hitting Mykolaiv. It was always also very hard. So really, I was just looking forward for the moment I could leave that town, because it was always constant pressure on us. We didn't know whether the Russians would break into our houses and take us and torture us, or loot our apartments, or maybe they would just kill us. When it was dark, they were driving around the town and just shining their flashlights into the house, into the apartments. I don't know what they were looking for, but I know a story about a friend of mine. He was just in his room, and some light started blinking, and the Russians just opened the fire on his house, on his window, and luckily he stayed alive, but really it was a matter of a second. The light started flashing, Russians started just open the fire. It was awful, really.
It sounds absolutely frightening. To be totally honest, and even if I try and imagine myself in that situation, I don't know what I'd do. I hear that before you left, you had to delete all your Facebook posts and destroy things. Why did you have to do that?
It was very difficult to leave because, as I've already said, they wouldn't let us leave the town, the city. But at the end of March, they finally allowed some people to leave the city, but it was hard to find someone who would take us away. We didn't have our car. There were no buses, of course, no trains. So I had to find a person who would take us away from the city. It was very hard, but we did it. And we had to pay like $350 for every person who wanted to leave. This road to Mykolaiv, the town near our town, it always takes like 1 hour and $2, and it was 12 hours.
Well, Julia, yes. Really, we want to keep in touch with you, so we'll definitely come and keep up and find out what you're doing. It's really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me now. That's Julia. She's a former resident in Kherson. We're speaking to her live there. Thank you so much, Julia. Well, off the back of that fascinating interview, I'm joined in the studio by political commentator Danny Armstrong. Danny, if I do say so myself, fascinating. I didn't write this, by the way. I don't know who wrote that, but heads will roll. Danny, Danny, so what do you think? What do you think? I mean, what's going on then? Because, I mean, the Russians appear to be, in a sense, almost retreating from places that they'd already taken. What is going on? It feels like a sort of tug of war, but nothing's actually moving. What's happening?
Well, Kherson is the largest and most westerly of the regions that was annexed by Russia recently. It kind of holds great significance for both sides. Of course, Ukraine, it has been a hub of resistance against Russian occupation. We've seen protests, we've seen people coming out on the main square, as Yulia said, riding around on tanks. Of course, when we saw that there was 87% who voted for the annexation by Russia, we kind of raised our eyebrows, as we mentioned before. For Russia, of course, it's the biggest territory that they have under their occupation. They're really going to fight tooth and nail to keep it. What we're seeing at the minute is what the Ukraine side has said is that we think that the Russians are feigning weakness in the area, which buys them a little bit of time to finish the evacuation that was finished today of civilians. Not all civilians have left. Some would rather stay because they find it more daunting actually leaving their hometown. But it buys the Russians more time to prepare for a Ukrainian insurgency that we're probably going to see.
Well, listen, Danny, we'll catch up with you in Worldview on Sunday and we'll find out more. But we have to hurry up because we're rushing off to the news now to find out what's going on. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. More to come just after 5. So it's just gone 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. For the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. Friday Focus is on the way. I'll be asking whether Brexit is to blame for the chaos within the Tory party. They should just blame themselves, though, to be fair. And for the Great British Debate this hour, I'll be asking, should self-identification require a medical diagnosis? Stay tuned. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, 1 minute past 5. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The Northern Ireland Secretary says he will call a snap election in the country, but hasn't said when. Chris Heaton-Harris said he would give more information next week and would meet with the Stormont parties. There's been no fully functioning devolved government since February. The DUP is blocking the restoration of power sharing in its protests against the Northern Ireland Protocol. Mr Heaton-Harris added he's faced with limited options. Scotland's First Minister will attend the COP27 climate summit as the Prime Minister is facing backlash over his decision not to go. The Scottish Government has confirmed Nicola Sturgeon will be going to the conference in Egypt next month. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak is coming under widespread criticism. Speaking in South London this morning, he said he will be instead focusing on domestic issues.
We're an example for others to follow at the pace in which we've reduced climate emissions, how we're going about protecting our environment, and those things are really important to me. It's important to me that as Prime Minister we leave behind an environment that is better for our children and grandchildren. I'm very passionate about that. I'm very personally committed to it, and I just think at the moment it's right that I'm also focusing on the depressing domestic challenges we have with the economy, and I think that's what people watching would reasonably expect me to be doing as well.
Meanwhile, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says not showing up to the climate conference shows a failure in leadership.
Prime Minister should be going to COP. He needs to show leadership. This is a hugely important issue, climate change. It's wound together with the energy crisis, and I think many people would be expecting the Prime Minister of the UK not just to attend COP, but to use it as an opportunity to pull world leaders together to deal with climate and to deal with energy. And if that doesn't happen, it's a failure of leadership.
A man has been convicted in Bristol of murdering his former partner who died 21 years after he doused her with petrol and set her on fire. Stephen Craig targeted Jacqueline Kirk in a car park in Weston-super-Mare in 1998. She suffered burns to 35% of her body. Craig was convicted of grievous bodily harm with intent but was arrested again last year following Ms Kirk's death. During the trial, medical experts explained how Craig's actions 21 years ago had made a more than minimal contribution to her death due to the long-lasting impact of the burns. A woman has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 34 years for killing her friend and decapitating the body. 38-year-old Gemma Mitchell has become the first woman to be sentenced on television in England. The woman was found guilty of murdering Mi Quen Chong at her London home in June last year and then driving her body in a suitcase to Devon. The judge's sentencing was broadcast live from the Old Bailey in London.
There is the chilling aspect of what you did to and with her body after you had killed her. You have shown absolutely no remorse, and it appears that you are in complete denial as to what you did, notwithstanding what, in my judgment, amounted to overwhelming evidence against you.
A further 13 inquests have opened into the deaths of former patients of the disgraced breast surgeon Ian Patterson. The Birmingham consultant is currently serving a 20-year sentence after carrying out needless operations on more than 1,000 patients over 14 years. An inquiry found he exaggerated or invented cancer risks. Police later asked a coroner to examine whether any former patients died from unnatural causes due to potentially substandard treatment. The husband of the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has been violently assaulted after a break-in at the couple's California home earlier today. A statement from her office says the assailant is in custody and the motivation for the attack is under investigation. Paul Pelosi was taken to hospital and is expected to make a full recovery. His wife was not in San Francisco at the time. A British-owned gas firm says it's reopened for this coming winter, increasing the country's gas storage capacity by 50%. Centrica says it's brought the Rough gas storage facility, which closed in 2017. Secretary of State for Business Grant Shapps tweeted saying the reopening is brilliant news, adding the move will strengthen UK energy security. And the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has lent a helping hand in putting the hands of Big Ben back to GMT. Sir Lindsay says the clock change will herald a new beginning for the iconic London landmark. It will be the first time Big Ben's put back since the scaffolding came down from the Elizabeth Tower following a 5-year restoration project. Clocks go back by an hour this Sunday. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Nana Akua.
Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 7 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is Associate Editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and former Conservative London mayoral candidate, Sean Bailey. Still to come. Each Friday at 5, I put something under the spotlight, and this time in Friday Focus, I'll be asking, has Brexit destroyed the Conservative Party? Now, since the referendum in 2016, the country has seen 2 general elections, and yes, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4 even, but 5 Tory leaders. I know we're all laughing. From David Cameron to the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Commentators have actually dubbed the circumstances as unprecedented. I would go as far as to say ludicrous, ridiculous. There are many other things I'd like to add to that, but it is during the day. But can people attribute the recent political turbulence within the Tory party to Brexit or something else? What do you think? And for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should a gender self-ID require a medical diagnosis? Now, SNP Minister Ash Regan resigned over Nicola Sturgeon's desire to overhaul transgender laws, which would allow Scots as young as 16 to change their legal gender by signing a declaration. Now, critics argue removing the requirement for a medical diagnosis blurs the distinction between men and women. What do you think? Send me your thoughts, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. So it's now time for Friday Focus. And back in 2016, if you cast your mind back, yes, the UK voted to leave the EU in a referendum, considered the biggest democratic exercise in British history. But a lot has happened since then in the last 6 years. The country has had 2 general elections, the first of which cost Theresa May the majority she inherited from David Cameron. Goodness knows why she bothered to do that. And it caused 2 years of political stalemate as pro-EU MPs tried to scupper Brexit. I mean, it was, again, almost funny. Oh, goodness, there's a quick shot there of Theresa May dancing. If you're watching on TV, you can see it. If you're listening on radio, you must have a look on the app. You'll see it, the GB News app. It's completely free. Go to it at 5:10, 9 minutes after 5. You'll find it there. Then, of course, came Boris Johnson, who replaced Theresa May in 2019 with his key promise to get Brexit done. He, of course, won the Tories their biggest majority since 1987, some almost 80 seats. But with his scandal hit time in number 10, I mean, all of it, a lot of it very superficial, but some eventually it brought him down. It came to an inglorious end over the summer. Liz Truss then lasted for 49 days as Prime Minister, and even that she didn't work much of it because we had loads of things going on, and then, of course, the Queen passed away, then we had the conferences, and so really she only did about 12 days. And the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, then entered the top job with the Conservatives over 30 points behind in the polls. Now, commentators are blaming Brexit for the chaos that currently afflicts the Tories, but what do you think? Is that right? I'm joined now by Dennis McShane. He's a former Labour Minister for Europe. Dennis, right, there's a lot there. I had to try and get it all in, but, I had to sort of give a sort of overview. Do you think that really what has eaten the Conservative parties is actually, if you look at it, look really into it, it's actually Brexit that started it all?
You have arguments about cause and correlation. I don't want to get into all that statistical stuff. And my goodness, you summarised everything, in about 3 seconds flat. You have to accept the fact that since 2016, British politics has been in a catastrophic mess. You listed the way Brexit has swallowed up 4 Conservative Prime Ministers. It may yet swallow up a 5th, because I think Rishi Sunak, I wish him well, but I think he's a much shakier, nervous, uncertain, inexperienced politician than we give him credit for. He represents a hedge fund on the banks, we know that, but we'll wait and see on that. Look at Labour. Just after Brexit, we end up with Jeremy Corbyn, the biggest vote loser Labour's had for 40 years. I don't think Brexit won Boris the 2019 election. Jeremy Corbyn gave it to him, gift-wrapped at Christmas in December, saying, I am your opponent, Boris, and you don't have to do anything to win. And now we've got the Liberal Democrats, who are back where they were.
Where are they?
Exactly. when I started in politics, it's 1970s, a long time ago, 10% in the polls. Gone are the glory days of Paddy Ashdown, of Charlie Kennedy, of 50 seats, of a power in the land. They went off in that sort of second referendum marching season and lost it. So Brexit really has done incredible damage to the British political class. And, as Tony Danko of the CBI was saying this morning all over the place, it's seriously messing up business as well.
But if you look at it, people voted for that.
Oh, yes.
We are in a democracy.
Yes.
And that was the democratic mandate.
Yes.
So,
I completely agree with you. Please don't get me wrong.
No, I don't get you.
I mean, it was 37% of the actual registered electorate voted for it, but it was a majority.
But it's the politicians who should be then managing Brexit.
Well, they refused to. Boris Johnson, 3 days after Brexit, writes a big article in the Daily Telegraph, and he says, Brexit means we will stay in the single market, we will stay in the customs union. You'll be able to live, work and settle on the continent.
Did he say that?
I wrote it word for word. Believe me, I've written books and articles. That quote
Engraved
is
on your forehead that he said those
absolutely.
things.
I'll tattoo it for you next time, Nana. And then up pops Mrs May 3 months later at a party conference saying, Brexit means Brexit. UKIP are right. No to the single market. No to travel. No to free trade. No to free trade. And joy in the hearts of all the people Rishi's put into his cabinet. The anti-Brexit gang go off in the second referendum parades, wasting time. And we're now in the mess we're in. It's done huge damage to Britain's reputation, but particularly done damage to every single politician in this country.
Well, perhaps if they sort of tried to manage it properly instead of sort of, I don't know. Let's find out what Dr. David Jeffrey, a lecturer in British politics at the University of Liverpool, thinks. So, Dr. David Jeffrey, what do you think? For the benefit of the viewers, why did David Cameron initially call for the EU referendum in the first place?
Well, it's important to remember at that time, UKIP, headed by Nigel Farage, were doing very well. So they came first in the European Parliament elections in 2014, followed by Labour and then the Conservatives on third place. Cameron was having pressure from the electorate then to call this referendum. He was having pressure from his backbenchers as well, and from some in his own cabinet who said, look, we need to lance this boil. Cameron was always quite sceptical about this, but in the end, he felt like he had to do it to settle it once and for all. And he was confident he was going to win, and that confidence was ultimately misplaced. So that's why he felt like he had to call one.
Well, stay right there, because joining me also is the director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom, the Heritage Foundation, and Niall Gardner. Niall, a lot of people look to this whole thing and think that Brexit is to blame for the mess initially that the Tories find themselves in. What do you think, or do you cite other main factors?
Nana, thanks very much for having me on the show today. And I don't think Brexit is the cause of the turmoil within the Conservative Party. I mean, clearly, I think the main problem with the Conservative Party is a lot of its MPs are simply not Conservative. And I think the drive, firstly, to oust Boris Johnson and then later Liz Truss, I think was really the wrong course for the party to go down. And we now, of course, have Rishi Sunak, and I hope that Sunak will succeed. But the reality is the Conservative Party has been really, I think, damaged by a great deal of infighting within the party. That's not to do with Brexit. In fact, if anything, I think Brexit has been an important unifying cause for British Conservatives. It's also democracy in action. This is the will of the British people. And it's vitally important that the new British government ensure that Brexit is fully implemented and that Great Britain is a success in the Brexit era. In my view, Britain is far better off outside of the European Union as a sovereign nation state, able to shape its own destiny, its own future on the world stage. And also Brexit, as we've seen with British leadership over Ukraine, Brexit Britain has been a very powerful force on the international stage. In fact, the leading opponent of Vladimir Putin's Russia following the Ukraine invasion. And that's thanks to, I think, the strength of British leadership outside of the European Union. The EU, I think, is in a state of tremendous upheaval itself. I think the EU is in steep decline and facing massive problems. Britain is far better off as a sovereign, independent nation state.
Well, Dennis, you're laughing. Well, why? What's wrong with what he said?
Niall, the most important country opposing Ukraine was Poland, followed by the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. And those countries are all in the EU. They have different political perspectives. I agree Boris Johnson and Liz Truss went for lots of photo calls in Ukraine. We've sent some weapons, not the giant howitzer killers, the most powerful artillery in the world the French have sent, that the Russians are terrified of. And who is the biggest opponent of the European Union east of us? It's Vladimir Putin. Ukraine wants into the EU. Putin hates the EU.
Can I respond to that?
Breaking down into lots of little nation states you can pick off one by one. But look, I agree with you about the vote. I have no problems with that. They voted in 1920 for prohibition in the United States. It did a lot of damage to America, Al Capone and speakeasies. And then 12, 13 years later, they gave up that crazy idea. As Tony Danker of the CBI, Jacob Rees-Mogg called Rishi Sunak a socialist, for heaven's sake.
Well, you're calling it a crazy idea, but Niall doesn't seem to think so at all. I mean, is what Dennis is saying, does it resonate
Can I
with you?
respond to you, Dennis? Because I think you're speaking a great deal of nonsense there, actually,
Okay, now
really.
you
A lot of Remainer nonsense. And, this idea that, that Britain is simply not leading on the world stage, that's ridiculous. Britain is leading on the international stage. Putin fears British leadership. You mentioned the French. The French have actually been trying to cut a deal with Putin behind the backs of the Ukrainians, actually. Some peace deal. Benefit the Russians, actually. You're just actually speaking to Russian propaganda. That is, the worst thing possible, actually, for the Russians is Brexit, frankly. Because you have a far stronger Britain on the
David Jeffrey into
the EU has appeased Putin for decades, shining the boots.
Let me bring David Jeffrey into this, because this is what they're saying, David. And let's see if perhaps David could be the voice of reason.
You need to really accept reality here, rather than spouting complete utter rubbish.
No, you can be the reason between these two. Are they making sense? Is Britain looked revered in a sense by Russia because we're out of the EU? What's your view?
I think, my view on this is that Boris Johnson's done a very good job in showing support for Ukraine, and we as a country have done a good job showing support for Ukraine. And we can see the support that we're giving to Ukraine in the energy, in our the cost of our energy bills, rather, right? That's a sacrifice that we as a nation are making to support the people of Ukraine. I don't think it's particularly helpful to have which country's doing more to help Ukraine, because the idea is to take an old phrase from the Cameronite era, we're all in this together, Ukraine stands and falls on the immense amount of effort they're putting in, but also on a unified international community that can condemn Putin.
I agree with David.
Very briefly, final word to you, then final word to Niall.
Quickly, David, your points were really, really good, but UKIP never won a seat in the House of Commons. I agree they won seats in the European Parliament. Anybody can win seats in the European Parliament. 2014, I wrote a book, I wish I brought it with me, called
I'm glad you didn't.
Brexit. I wasn't going to read it out, just the cover, Brexit, How Britain Will Leave Europe. I couldn't get anybody to take it seriously. The political elites, as you said, David Cameron, the Labour guys...
OK, well, let's give...
all thought it was impossible.
Nobody will take it seriously. Can I get Niall, you've got about 20 seconds for your final word.
Yeah, sure. I think my message to Dennis is, look, you've got to just accept the democratic will of the British people.
I do.
And, the Remainers really are stuck in the past, actually. They've got to accept the reality and embrace the idea of a sovereign, free Britain, which is good for Britain, it's good for the world as well, Dennis. That's the reality.
I accept
do you think then, ultimately at the end of this then, Dennis, one word, do you think that Brexit is the reason why the Conservative Party are falling apart? Yes or no? Do you think it is?
Look at what's happened since 2016. What else has happened? What else has happened? The answer is Brexit happened. The Tory party in chaos. Labour isn't doing that.
So what's the answer? Yes.
Well, of course it has.
And what about you, Dr. David Jeffrey? What do you think? Yes, do you think it's been the reason why they're eating themselves from the inside out?
No, it's their own lack of discipline. They should do better.
They should do better. And finally, now, final word to you, same thing. Are they eating themselves from the inside out because of Brexit?
No, it's not because of Brexit. I think it's because of... largely because of Tory wets within the Conservative Party trying to undermine, frankly, firstly Boris Johnson, then later Liz Truss, and I think it's very unfortunate. And the Conservative Party does have to be more disciplined, has to be united around conservative policies and principles. After all, it's the Conservative Party.
Thank you very much. Fabulous. Right, thank you so much to Dennis McShane. Thank you so much to Dr. David Jeffrey. And also, Niall, thank you so much to you as well, Niall Gardner. Brilliant stuff. Thank you. Right. So what do you think, then? What do you think? On the way, the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should gender identification require a medical diagnosis? That is coming up. But also tell me what your thoughts are with regard to whether you think Brexit is the reason why the Conservative Party have come to the place that they are now and the way they've behaved across the last few years or so. Do you think that's why a lot of the political parties are behaving in the manner that they do? But on the way, our Great British Debate, and I'm asking, Should gender self-identification require a medical diagnosis? Now, the SNP Minister, Ash Regan, has resigned over Nicola Sturgeon's desire to overhaul transgender laws, which would effectively allow Scots as young as 16 to change their legal gender. Now, all they have to do is sign a declaration. But should this be allowed? All of that after this break.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Good afternoon. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Sorry. I'm Nana Akua. Welcome, if you just joined me. Fantastic. Right, it's time for the Great British Debate This Out, and I'm asking, should self-identification require a medical diagnosis? Now, this follows the decision of SNP Minister Ash Regan to resign over Nicola Sturgeon's gender recognition reform bill, which would actually allow Scots as young as 16 to change their legal gender by simply signing a declaration. Now, the bill passed its first hurdle in Hollywood yesterday. Explaining her resignation, Regan said that her conscience would not allow her to support a bill that may have negative implications for the safety and dignity of women and girls. And she's not the only one to have been so public with her opposition to the bill. Many feminists, including the author J.K. Rowling, believe that the changes pose a risk to women and girls as predatory men may abuse the system to gain access to women's spaces. So, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should self-identification require a medical diagnosis? Well, to kick things off, I'm joined by Susan Smith, co-director of For Women Scotland, a group set up to protect and strengthen women and children's rights. Well, first of all, Susan, what is your view of the recognition of the gender recognition reform bill? I mean, is it a threat to safety, as Ash Regan claims?
Yeah, the problem with the bill as it stands is that it's opening up a process to a whole new cohort of people. There's no definitions in the bill about who this might be. They are no longer going to have to require a medical diagnosis. So, in effect, anybody and everybody could apply for a gender recognition certificate. And we still haven't had clarity on what that affects in law as regards women's rights and the right to single-sex spaces and services.
Now, I mean, so presumably you applaud Ash's decision to resign over the bill. I mean, the decision will cost her, more than £30,000 a year in salary. In your view, was that the right move for her to do that? And what would you think? What do you suggest that should be done then if this change actually happens?
It was an incredibly principled and brave stance for action. As you say, it's reduced her salary by a third. So it's got a financial cost, and she will probably not be invited back, certainly by Nicola Sturgeon, anytime soon. She has been somebody who has said she's had concerns about this for a long time. She was one of 15 SNP politicians who signed a letter in 2019 saying that they had issues with the bill as it stood then, the proposed bill as it stood then. And the bill hasn't changed since then. The proposition that came before the Holyrood Parliament yesterday was pretty much exactly the same one as was touted in 2019. So it shouldn't have come as a surprise to anyone. And I think that she showed enormous integrity, and that's what we would hope and expect our politicians to have. And I would hope that some of the other politicians who have also got concerns, and we know they've got concerns, will follow her example.
Well, let's hope they don't all resign, because we need them to stand up against it. Susan, stay right there. I'm also joined by former SNP councillor Austin Sheridan, who supports the gender recognition reform bill. So, Austin, tell me why you support this bill and the reform to it.
Yeah, I support the bill because when we look at what the bill actually does, is it simply allows people to change their gender on their birth certificate. And what I tend to find is that although there may be genuine concerns when it comes to the protection of of single-sex spaces, and those are things that are covered in the 2010 Equality Act, this legislation doesn't change any of those rights enshrined in the Equality Act whatsoever. People have the right to be trans. Anyone can choose to be trans. Anyone can legally change their name, and anyone can live as a man or a woman. They don't need any medical permission to do that. So this bill, although there are concerns raised, what people are raising concerns about are already things that are legislated for. So they're looking at the completely the wrong legislation.
Yeah, but what I mean, look, saying that you're trans, that's fine, but changing your sex legally is what this will mean, and you can do it without any real due process in terms of any medical, anybody medical looking over to check that you are genuine in doing that. So do you not think that it opens the pathway to people who may want to manipulate that and take advantage of the situation, Austin?
Absolutely not, because if people were going to use changing their gender to manipulate people, you don't need to legally change your gender or your sex to do that. People have the right to be trans. There is no law preventing someone living as a trans person if that is how they feel and that's how they want to live their life. What this legislation will allow them to do is change a document, which is their birth certificate. They can already change their name on their passport. You can change your name on your passport, your bank. You can live by any name you want under current legislation.
Yeah, that's fine. But it's a legal thing. Susan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is where there's a basic misunderstanding, because the Equality Act and the Gender Recognition Act do impinge upon each other, and we know that. And we know that when the GRA was originally drafted, there was something slipped in Schedule 9 that said a person's sex had changed for all legal purposes. Now, people will talk about the single-sex exceptions in the Equality Act. What they do not say is that they are actually already incredibly hard to put into practice. And so I would, if this is as meaningless as advocates suggest, I would ask why this is so necessary, because why does anybody, frankly, have to change their sex? There are rights. We have rights enshrined in law which are based upon sex. And the sex that we have, we cannot change it. It affects lots of aspects, especially of women's lives. And by doing this, I find it astonishing that people are still unaware of things like Section 22 within the GRA, which makes it almost impossible to find out if somebody has a GRA or not. You can't a GRC or not, and you can't even ask people.
GRC, could you just clarify what a GRC is for anybody who
So a GRC is the gender recognition certificate.
Oh, I see.
That allows people to legally make this legal change.
Okay.
And also I find some of the language in this incredibly sexist. How do you live as a man or a woman? And this idea that you don't have to change your gender to access women's spaces. Unfortunately, you don't. And that's part of the problem. We have got a lot of people now self-identifying their way into this. This is a huge social change. And pieces of legislation like this make it much, much harder for women to set boundaries and define their rights.
Austin, do you take that on board, that that is what the problem is with this particular legislation? You've got about 30 seconds.
No, I mean, as I say, I don't see that at all because, as I say, if we're looking at legislation that we have just now, and what's been touched upon there is that people do have the right to identify as the gender that they wish to identify as already. This is something that people do, you know. And then when you look at asking people to produce evidence, I mean, what circumstances are we talking about there? Are we talking about having people standing outside toilets and asking them to prove if that is if that's their sex? I mean, it's just ridiculous, and it's not actually a major issue in countries where it's already the case, such as Ireland, Norway, and Denmark.
Well, listen, we're running out of time. This conversation can go on for a lot longer, I can tell you that. My panel will debate it. Suzanne Smith, thank you very much. She's the co-director of Women for Scotland, and Austin Sheridan, former SNP councillor. Thank you very much for talking to me this afternoon. Well, you're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, we will continue with our Great British debate this hour. And I'm asking, should self-identification require a medical diagnosis? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, Associate Editor at the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and also former London Conservative mayoral candidate, Sean Bailey. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, 5:34. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The Northern Ireland Secretary says he'll call a snap election in the country, but hasn't said when. Chris Heaton-Harris said he would give more information next week and would meet with the Stormont parties. There's been no fully functioning devolved government since February. The DUP is blocking the restoration of power sharing in its protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol. Mr Heaton-Harris added he's faced with limited options.
I have limited options ahead of me. I'm under a legal duty to call an election within 12 weeks. I've had lots and lots of talks with all the parties and will continue to do so. And that I hear it when parties say that they really do not want an election at all. But nearly all of them are parties who signed up to the rules, the law that means I need to call an election. So you'll hear more from me on that particular point next week.
Scotland's First Minister will attend the COP27 climate summit as the Prime Minister is facing backlash over his decision not to go. The Scottish Government has confirmed Nicola Sturgeon will be going to the conference in Egypt next month. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak is coming under widespread criticism. Speaking in South London this morning, he said he will be instead focusing on domestic issues.
Well, we are trying.
We're an example for others to follow at the pace in which we've reduced climate emissions, how we're going about protecting our environment, and those things are really important to me. It's important to me that as Prime Minister we leave behind an environment that is better for our children and grandchildren. I'm very passionate about that. I'm very personally committed to it, and I just think at the moment it's right that I'm also focusing on the depressing domestic challenges we have with the economy, and I think that's what people watching would reasonably expect me to be doing as well.
The husband of the US House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, has been violently assaulted after a break-in at the couple's California home earlier today. A statement from her office says the assailant is in custody and the motivation for the attack is under investigation. Paul Pelosi was taken to hospital and is expected to make a full recovery. His wife was not in San Francisco at the time. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me. Noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 40 minutes after 5 o'clock. If you've just tuned in, where have you been? We are GB News. This is the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. It is now time for our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, should self-identification require a medical diagnosis? Now, this, of course, is following SNP Minister Ash Regan's decision to resign over Nicola Sturgeon's gender recognition reform bill, which would allow Scots as young as 16 to change their legal gender by simply just signing a declaration. And explaining her resignation, Regan said that her conscience would not allow her to support a bill that may have negative implications for the safety and dignity of women and girls. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should self-identification require a medical diagnosis? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by Associate Editor at the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and former Conservative London mayoral candidate, Sean Bailey. Sean, what do you think about that? OK, so for me, I'll be honest, I'll be straight out there. I don't care if someone's trans, they can do whatever they like, they can say whatever they like. I call them he, she, whatever. But, and you know, if I don't know how far I'd go with it, but ultimately, a man is a man, a woman is a woman. Look, I'm sorry, but that's what I see.
On a personal basis, this is a very easy thing to deal with. You know, I'll call you whatever you want to be, and that's fine, and you present a way. I think what your last guest missed is a challenge this will be to organisations. If you run an all-girls school, for instance, and someone has self-identified as a girl and are legally supported by that, you will not be able to make a decision for them not to come to the school or not, which presents you a problem with other parents who may have a problem. What do you do about changing rooms? What do you do about competitions? All of these things. And of course, there is the thing about security. Some men will self-identify as a woman and be realistic about that, but also still be attracted to women. Is it correct to then put them in a women's change room if they still have the anatomical pieces that we consider belong to men? And these are the challenges that bill simply has not answered.
Well, and the problem is not so much that someone wants to, you know, if all the medical supervisions that person has gone through, all the necessary medical provisions to ensure that they are mentally stable and all the things, and then I'm more inclined to feel comfortable with the shared space of somebody who has maybe transitioned, and I'm more likely to feel comfortable with that. I know they've gone through the checks and balances, but if anyone can just go ahead and just say, oh yeah, you know, I've decided I'm going to be a woman, you know,
But
that leaves it open, and that's the problem.
Look, people are talking about leaving it open to abuse, and I'm sure we'll cover that and everything. But I'm not even talking about the abuse. I'm just talking about the reality of people who are not doing it out of paid abuse. What we're looking at now is catering to the individual at the detriment of the larger group, and that larger group is women. And let's be clear, young girls. I have a 15-year-old daughter. Yeah. I might have a problem if she had to be in a changing room with 18-year-old boys, for instance, who transitioned.
Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, no, I get all that, and I think there's about 100,000 people in the trans community. The last figure I saw, to round that, so it's a very small number in country of 67 million people. But it's an issue that's got to be tackled, because I think they deserve to be treated with sympathy and dignity, and people should be able to live their lives how they want. And at the same time, I don't want to be a bloke shouting at women.
Yes,
another
bloke of women, then.
Shouting at. I just don't. I don't want to be that. And I like it when the debate, and I thought your debate was civil, which too often this debate isn't. But trans people say the current system is very bureaucratic, cold and humiliating to change your gender.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there is a way we can do it better. And then you have to look on what happens with women-only spaces at the moment and sport, because biological sex does matter. So I think if we discuss it and we debate it and we listen, I'm sure we can get a consensus and get somewhere to allay your fears, which I fully understand.
But it's too quick. It's too quick.
Yeah,
Nicola Sturgeon pressing ahead with this thing.
Yeah, but
it's too quick.
But it's real. I'd like to see what's happened in other countries. We heard Ireland and others mentioned, saying there's not been a problem. I'd like to see if that is the case. What can we learn, rather than just go for British exceptionalism of just doing it our own way? Look what's happened elsewhere in the world. And I think we've also got to be very careful not to somehow portray, inadvertently or otherwise, every trans woman as a potential predator.
No, but that's not really the point as to whether the person will be a predator or not. Yeah. The point is that if there is no checks and balances to ensure that this person is, gone through a certain process that we could make better and more, kinder and more gentle, and if there's no process at all, then it just leaves it wide open. And I think that is where madness lies. It's madness.
The other big issue, of course, is particularly for young people.
Yeah.
If you're a young person and you're thinking about making this decision, you need support. It may well be the right decision for you, but it's not a decision that young people should be making alone in isolation. And this bill gives that option. And again, I have young children. I have a 13-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter. I would want to be part of that process. I wouldn't want them to come home with a legal document that meant that I couldn't say anything.
The NHS in England has issued fresh guidance on how certainly young people deal. Don't go straight to puberty blockers, because it may just be a phase they're going through, or they really may have been born in the wrong body, and then you have to deal with that. Now, if you want to register and change your gender, your sex, you have to then live as the other person. Well, in some ways, it's impossible to live as the other person. If you're a man, you can't live as a woman if you're banned from a lot of women-only spaces. But then that creates an issue itself in terms of safety. Should somebody just be playing a game?
I just don't think they've thought it through.
I think they are.
No, they haven't thought it through. They're putting the legislation, changing the legislation without putting thinking of the sort of the ricochet, the ramification.
And what's important, when you change the legislation, it then puts organisations on the back foot, because if you arrive into an organisation with a legal piece of paper that says I am this sex, then that organisation has no legal right to make the rules that it feels are necessary to defend the people that it has to represent.
It's always at the expense of women as well. And I find it ironic that the person defending it was a man.
Yeah, well, I'm
sorry, but that's what I saw.
I am here. I'm trying, if I'm contradicting you or challenging you.
Go on, get out.
I am aware. No, but I'm aware that I'm another man. Not shouting at you, but pushing back. And because I think, look, trans rights are human rights, but women's rights are human rights too.
Nobody's saying that the trans people don't have rights. Nobody's saying that. And I find it interesting that the conversation often sort of ends up in that direction, when all that is actually being said is that if you are trans, then there should be a proper medical process that you go through so that you can confirm that you are, so that it doesn't open it out to abuse for other people, because the people that will suffer that consequence will be women.
Well, I think most areas are quite easy to deal with, because there should be no discrimination in work and employment and law and health and education. That's all quite the easy part in a way. but it then comes down to those women-only spaces, sort of changing rooms, toilets,
Well, and look, that's the thing that hasn't been you can't deny sex matters. I've watched, you know, 200-pound, 6-foot men play rugby against women. That's dangerous and unfair.
It's wrong. Well, listen, this show's nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voices on, their opportunity to tell us what they think about the topics we're discussing today. I've got 4 of them. Yeah, we love that. Right. Who should we start with? Let's go for Dr. Seshni Moodlia. She's there in Milton Keynes. Seshni, hello. What do you think about this then? Self-ID without any medical checks and balances?
Good evening, Nana, and thank you for having me on. Such an interesting topic. I agree with a lot of what you've said tonight and some of your panelists. Self-identification has always required a medical diagnosis. So usually it's diagnosed by professionals like myself, person having criteria according to the DSM-5, the diagnostic criteria for at least 6 months. And in order to obtain the gender recognition certificate that your panelists explained, a person needs to have lived with that gender for at least 2 years.
But
so I think...
But if we take all that away, which is what this thing is saying, isn't it? It's saying that you can just do that. Do you think that is a good way forward? You know, very briefly.
I don't, because as you've said, you know, then anyone can change their gender, and I think the other concern is actually changing the age from 18 to 16. Usually, gender identity disorders or gender issues can peak at the age 11, 13, and 26 years, and sometimes it could just be a phase that someone's going through. So I think that is a concern.
Thank you, Doctor. And she's a doctor as well, and she deals with all that stuff, so she should know. Right, let's see, where else should we go? I don't think Nicola Sturgeon consulted any. Let's have a chat to Gareth Wyn-Jones, who's there in Snowdonia in Wales. Gareth, what do you think about this?
Well, I'm a farmer. You know, we have 2 genders here. We have male and female. But I do believe some people are born into the wrong bodies as well. And I'm glad we've got a doctor. And, you know, what you're bringing forward is it's good to have this discussion. It's just a crazy world we're living in, and I think, you know, if these people are not happy with their gender, it's not something that we should be changing, like changing your underpants or your car or something. This is a massive thing.
It's a huge thing, isn't it?
Especially at a young age. Yeah, you know, it needs to be thought out, and it needs at least 2 to 5 years for them to have, you know, a thought process of that they have done the right thing. Yeah. And for me, you know, it's a massive problem, and there's a lot more of it. So we need to discuss it, and we need to make sure that the youngsters get the right help from the right people. I think a lot of it can be psychologists, doctors, medical.
They need all that before they go through it. Olivia, quickly now, you've got about 30 seconds.
Yes, I think a psychological evaluation is absolutely necessary. I think 2 to 3 months is far too short. Who's to say they won't change their mind again in another 2 or 3 months? You know, it's a major life change. And there's a safety issue. Who's to say people don't want to change their sex for, you know, unkind reasons because they want to take advantage of people, and who's going to suffer?
Thank you, Olivia. Let's quickly go over to Miranda Richardson, not the Miranda Richardson, but a different one. She's in Northampton. Miranda, you've got about 30 seconds.
Hi, Nana. Well, it's very simple from my view. You know,
we can't hear
research is done all the time about how children's brains work and how our minds work and develop. And again, this is where spending a bit of time, spending a bit longer, figuring out exactly how you feel about it is more important than being able to stick a name on a form saying, I don't want to be that today, I want to be this. You know, it's so dangerous. They can fall into so different areas of trouble.
Lovely. Nicely done, Miranda. Thank you very much for that. That's Miranda Richardson, Dr. Seshni Moodlia-Rensburg, Gareth Wyn-Jones and Olivia Parry. They were my great British voices. And today I've been asking, should self-ID require medical diagnosis? Lots of you have been getting in touch. Nancy says self-identification shouldn't exist. Your sex is determined by your chromosomes, which you can't change. We can't go down this fantasy rabbit hole to accommodate 1% of the population. Steve cuts straight to the chase. He says, I think that there are only 2 genders. End. Evan adds, of course, it should require a proper medical diagnosis. The system has been fine up until now with supervision, medical care and checks and balances. Why change it now and risk harm to many? Right, well, that's it. You've been very vocal on that one. Let's move on to this story that caught my eye today. The Prime Minister has said that the recently reappointed Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has learnt from her mistake after she resigned just after 43 days after causing a security breach. 1 day more than or less than Liz Truss. At number 10, she said the Prime Minister has full confidence in Suella Braverman, despite the fact that MI5 will be giving her lessons on what she can and cannot share in order to prevent future setbacks. So, should Sunak have reappointed Braverman? Let's see what my panel make of that. Kevin Maguire and Sean Bailey. Who's going to go first? Kevin's looking at me. What do you think? Should he have given a...
No, I think he made a mistake. As Jake Berry, who was Conservative Party chair at the time, said there were multiple breaches involved cyber security. I think he did a deal. The Prime Minister did a deal. I'd say a dodgy deal with her, get her support so he could become Prime Minister, and he's rewarded with a Home Office. It's an incredibly sensitive government department.
Well, we've got to let Sean respond to that.
I'd have to say, look, this kind of breach has happened many, many times with many, many ministers, but what really should happen, the briefing by MI5 should happen first, not after the case. But I think it's the right thing to do, and what he can't do is get rid of her now, because that would show weakness, and we like to keep the Prime Minister we have.
Well, and frankly, we haven't got enough ministers to shuffle around. Right, now it's time for our quick fires. It's time to shed some light on some of the other stories making the headline. First, according to research, just 2 minutes of vigorous exercise a day can cut the risk of early death by a fifth. The study revealed that simply walking up the stairs, I do that a lot, going for a swim or skipping can be counted as vigorous, as well as going to the gym. So, Kevin, do you walk upstairs and are you quite... You look like you're a runner.
I do. I make sure I walk or run at least 10 miles a day, 22,000 steps. I know. It can take a bit.
You're making us all look bad.
If I go for a 6-mile run in the morning, it's fine. I love it.
But you look good.
So I always walk up the stairs. I always walk up escalators, all that. You just build it in. You'll live longer and you'll be happier.
I did 22 years of gymnastics, so I like to keep fit.
Well.
And what it is, I like to do resistance training, so I've got a kettlebell that I go crazy with, and I'm a walker because I'm impatient. If I'm at the bus stop, I walk to the next one. I like to walk.
So you're a gymnast. I was a gymnast. I do Ashtanga heat yoga.
Ooh.
Yes, I can do a press handstand with my legs just going wide like that. I mastered it yesterday, so I was very pleased with myself. Everyone went, wow!
Oh.
Right, now let's go over to Wales, where Gwent police forked out £40,000 on 4 tuk-tuks, in which the force claims it will help officers fight crimes. They'll be exhausted when they get there. The rickshaw cars, known for their use as taxis, primarily in Asian countries, will be deployed as safe spaces where people can report incidents and seek help when they're feeling unsafe. So what do you think? Do you think a tuk-tuk would stop it?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, no. Look, the police have to retain some sort of authority in almost every situation, and that vehicle does not breed confidence.
Maybe it'll work if it's in a shopping centre in a pedestrianised area, but you're quite right. I think most criminals could probably outrun that.
That 6-mile run, you'd easily beat that.
You don't even have to do your yoga.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have thought, but it's...
No.
They should have got something that looks a little bit more substantial.
Well, finally, let's check out this diver's very lucky escape when she narrowly avoided diving straight into the mouth of a tiger shark off the coast of Hawaii. You've got to check this out. If you're listening on radio, check it out on the app. She's just... You must take a look at that. Check out our GB News. Get the app and take a look. It was at 5:55. I'm running out of time. So basically, Ocean Ramsey saw her near-death experience post, left her laughing more than surprised. Yeah, right. Would you find that funny, Sean? Have you ever almost been eaten by the jaws of a shark?
I love swimming in the sea. It's another pastime of mine. That shark would put me right off. But it's interesting that she didn't see it before she saw it.
Yeah, what about you?
She was nearly a ready-made meal there.
Well, listen, up next is Michelle Dewby. We're Dubes & Co, and she's here. Michelle, what exciting stuff have you got for us in your show next?
Hello, Nana. Yes, over £6 million a day now is being spent housing migrants in hotels. There was a proposal earlier on this month, actually, to look at whether or not tents could be erected in London parks instead of hotel accommodation. That was pretty much immediately ruled out. Tonight, I'm asking, should it have been? Also, facial recognition technology. What do we think to this? Is it an infringement on privacy, or is it an essential tool when it comes to fighting crime? And a case that I will always remember, it happened in my hometown, Hull. The murder of Libby Squire. Her mum has reached out to her killer. She's going to meet him. not necessarily for forgiveness, but for understanding. But it's made me ponder the whole kind of restorative justice. Would you ever want to meet someone who'd committed a crime so hideous against your family? Could you ever even imagine yourself forgiving someone? I couldn't. Well, I'd be fascinated to hear what my audience think of that.
Yeah. For sure, that will be fascinating to hear. I don't know whether I could either. Thank you for that, Michelle. She's up next. On today's show, I've been asking, who do you trust with the economy, Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer? According to the Twitter poll, it's slightly changed. 68% of you say Rishi, the remainder say Sir Keir Starmer. Thank you so much to my panel, Associate Editor at the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and also former Conservative at London, I almost called you Labour there, London candidate Sean Bailey for joining me today. And as ever, a huge thank you to you at home for your company. I'll be back tomorrow at 4 to discuss the top stories with broadcaster and columnist Lizzie Cundy and also political commentator Albie Amonkoma. But now I'll leave you with the latest weather. Enjoy.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern. Welcome along to the latest weather update from the Met Office. Rain for some of us during the rest of the day, mainly northern Scotland, but drier for many after the rain has cleared through. But it stays breezy. Similar setup when you look at the bigger picture compared with the last few days. Low pressure sitting to the west and various weather fronts coming up from the south-southwest along with very mild air. We've seen rain progress north across the UK. Shetland still clinging on to that rain until late evening. Showers follow for western Scotland, Northern Ireland, a brisk breeze here, lighter winds elsewhere and clear spells for a time, but a thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain will return by the end of the night into southern England and South Wales. 12 to 13 Celsius in the south. I think under any clear spells for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, 4 to 7 Celsius and a bright start here first thing this weekend. However, the rain in the south is moving north and by late morning it reaches Northern Ireland, it reaches southern Scotland. It does clear from the south for a time, but further spells of rain or showers will affect Wales and the southwest. Meanwhile, the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast sees sunshine returning and an awful lot of warmth, 22 or 23 Celsius here.